Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest in the ASFP's webinar program. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Andrew Taylor. I'm Head of Technical here at ASFP, and I'm going to do a quick regulatory review of what's happened this year and what we see happening next year, and a few other bits and pieces. We've got a number of you dialed in already. I'm going to wait for a few minutes while the others join us, and then we'll make a start. Right, it looks like the number of participants have sort of settled out, so everyone that's coming is here. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this the webinar. It's the usual rules and processes for those of you who've been on one of these webinars before. We have within the system, there is a chat box. We have a questions and answer box and as well. And if you want to interact with us, please do it through that, through either of those. We've got a number of polls set up during the webinar concerned, and as we'll get to those as and when we do. And basically, I'm going to run through a presentation, and then as time allows, we'll do some Q&A. Hopefully, we'll get some Q&A at the end of it, and there's some questions that we can deal with. Okay. So, and as per usual, for those of you who have been on one of these before, this webinar has got CPD accreditation. It says it's through IFE. It's actually our own CPD accreditation nowadays. Must change that slide. It's an email to info@asfp.org.uk if you want a CPD certificate. We run this webinar in real time. We are going to record this webinar and then put it up on the YouTube channel like we do with all the others. If you're watching this live today, the 11th of December, yes, you can have a CPD certificate. If you're watching it on catch-up TV, sorry, you can't, you know, and please don't email us because you may be charged. Right. That takes me merrily along, and I'll go early with poll question 1 this time. So I'm hoping this can be, and it's the usual folks, so that we can just help judge the audience that we've got today. What's your involvement in passive fire protection, please? And you should hopefully be able to select one of those. And here comes the answer with any luck. So the biggest cohort by not very much is manufacturers, but we've got quite a lot of you who are involved in the architects and the design of passive fire protection. That's good. That should be interesting to see. Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That's how that works. Now, he said, I know that many of you think I just use the same old slides over and over again. That's potentially true, although there's been quite a bit of editing to do this time round. But I actually this was my last slide when I did this webinar last year at Christmas. And when we did the webinar last year, the things that we were looking forward to, the number one thing that we thought we were looking forward to coming out in the coming months was the new construction products regulations, which we just had a meeting with government about, and civil service was very, very enthusiastic about how they were going to get through that. And we're still waiting. And we'll talk a bit more about that and where all that is going. The other stuff with the other topics there was stuff we're working on, and yes, we're still working on them, and I'm going to cover that again. We'll cover where we've got to and where we think we're going next. Okay, so we'll start off. We're going to touch briefly on the regulations in terms of two key pieces: what's happened within Building Safety Act and the secondary legislation, and also, of course, in September we had the Grenfell fire inquiry phase 2 report came out, and we'll touch briefly on that. And then you should hopefully all be familiar with the fact that we talk about improving as ASFP, improving building safety, and those 4 areas, and that my little 3 circle in a box model. And again, that's how we've been sort of rectifying things. So, sure, you're all aware, Building Safety Act was the enabling legislation for all 53 of Dame Judith Hackett's recommendations. Royal Assent last year, Royal Assent in April 2022, and implementation from 22 to mid 2024. We saw the last tranche of secondary legislation came through in August last year, came into effect October last year, and that was the vast majority of the stuff that the government was doing under that. There is one missing piece of secondary legislation that's not been published, that the Secretary of State gave herself powers to do, which was write new construction product regulations. And that's the one thing we're still waiting for out of Building Safety Act. The rest of that, the secondary legislation that was planned has come forwards, and we're still some of it's quite complicated and quite dry, and we are still picking up what that precisely means and the sentiments around that. But we'll again talk about that in a minute. Come on, computer, thank you. So the other, of course, significant thing that's happened in the second half of this year was the publication of the Grenfell Phase 2 inquiry report. Happened on the first week of September. It's a massive document. There's over nearly 1,600 pages worth of stuff to read in there. Even just the overview is over 50 pages. A couple of things from ASFP's standpoint regarding the thing. You have to respect the fact that the inquiry comes back and said to us that all 72 deaths were wholly avoidable, and equally that the whole evidential side that they've done is we don't dispute any of. I don't know. At the time that the publication came out, we were sat on a TG6 meeting, and we paused the TG6 meeting to watch the webinar that the inquiry gave, and it was also broadcast live at the time on the BBC. Probably one of the most powerful statements that came out was the one from a lady called Thuria Stefan, who was Martin Moore-Bick's right-hand woman during the whole process. She's an architect, and she gave us a quote. If you work in the construction industry and you don't feel the weight of responsibility for the safety of the people that we have, then we're in the wrong job. So we should bear in mind all the time that everything that we're doing is about making sure that we deliver safer buildings and we improve the safety of our existing building stock. That said, if you go through the evidence and you read through the recommendations, there's a series of things that come out as the path to how we ended up to where we did. And one of the issues that we have was within government, that deregulation has been a culture of successive governments. But equally, there's a lack of understanding of ADB, a lack of keeping ADB up to date, and various and lots of people sort of playing the blame game, thinking that contractually the blame laid somewhere else. And the whole deregulation piece was against the backdrop it's been in. It's been a sort of a government theme since Margaret Thatcher, but continued by all flavours of government ever since, that if you wanted to write a new regulation, you had to get rid of one. But that was against a theme where the graph shows, falling numbers of deaths in high-rise blocks of flats in England and falling numbers of fires in high-rise blocks of flats. If you remember back at the time of immediately post Grenfell, not long after was FireX in Excel in Docklands, and the magazine Private Eye actually sent a cartoonist around and an interview around doing various interviews. That cartoon actually appears in Private Eye, and obviously, I don't know if you recognise our very own Niall Rowan, but that is our very own Niall Rowan from FireX, way back then. So if we look at that, the Grenfell inquiry gives us 58 further recommendations to consider. Now, I'll be honest, nearly all of there's a lot of the recommendations for government about things that government should be doing, and an awful lot of recommendations in there are aimed at local authorities, not necessarily in terms of prevention, but in how we should seek to manage such an event if one ever happens again. There's only really 8 of them that are in relevant areas for ASFP and our membership. But one of my overriding sort of thoughts in reading the recommendations was that whilst there was a logical flow from the recommendations within Dame Judith Hackett to the recommendations within the Morell and Day report, so building a safer future, testing for a safer future, this and equally from my perspective, they kind of mirrored what I thought. They kind of mirrored my thoughts on things. This one doesn't. This one's a bit of an outlier. It takes a lot of its source from the evidence that they've received, and it doesn't necessarily follow on and have a logical flow with it. And some of the recommendations kind of go into places where I would never have thought we'd end up going. This was published in September this year, and on the day that it was published, government committed they would respond in 6 months, and unless they could do it faster. So there's a ticking time bomb for government, which is the 6th of March next year, when government needs to come back to us and tell us how they're going to respond to these 58 recommendations, unless they can do it faster. And I don't know if you've seen it. Obviously, there has already been some response to this. In terms of a debate within the Houses of Parliament that they were considering it. That happened last Monday. I don't think I learned too much from reading the transcript of that, apart from the fact that all political parties seem to be wholeheartedly behind all 58 recommendations. There's a thought, and equally, that there were some bits and pieces in there that didn't make sense. But the other thing that's happened is there's been a lot of discussion so far has been about accelerating the pace of remediation of the existing building stock. And I think where we are with the current government is there's a big focus on accelerating that. There's timelines been set for how quickly existing building stock should be remediated. And so I think that's been a lot of the focus of the conversations within. It's obviously, and it's also if you look at the debate transcript, lots of discussion is about remediation rather than anything else. Some of the recommendations relevant to us make complete sense. Define high-risk buildings in terms other than height. We've been saying and the Secretary of State has powers under Building Safety Act to do that. So expect some changes like that in terms of risk profile to come along. Review ADB as soon as possible, and again that process has started within HSE. There is an inquiry open at the moment on that, and that review, I think the review panel will be compiled put together some point early in the new year as under the Building Advisory Committee. It should be the mandatory that fire engineers are doing fire strategies, and equally it should be and the government should have a publicly accessible record of recommendations made by select committees, etc., etc. And this is, we had the inquiry after Summerland, we had the inquiry after Lacanel House. Why haven't some of those issues that came up in those inquiries been dealt with properly as per se? Well, there's a legal requirement for that. There is also a statutory requirement that applications through Gateway 2 have to be supported by somebody on behalf of the principal designer under Building Safety Act to point out that the building has been designed to be as safe as is required by the building regulations. So there's a recommendation that there is a statement in there from within the principal designer to cover that, and there is already the legal requirement in effect that the principal designer under Building Safety Act is responsible for that. And there's a level of and I know that's a thing that's caused a lot of discussion that we see about to what extent can that principal designer role be novated, and the answer is, from a legal standpoint, it sits within the client appointed principal designer, whoever that is. Some of them we like, and some of the recommendations we're a bit, I'll be honest, we're a bit less keen on. There's the concept of setting up an overarching construction regulator. To be honest, we quite like it. We quite like the idea of because at the moment we have within fire and construction, some of the fire stuff sits within HSE. But the construction products stuff sits under MHCLG. The fire and rescue services stuff sits under the Home Office, and there's lots of different people using, and you end up with the situation where it gets very confused, because we have the term principal designer in CDM, we have the term principal designer in Building Safety Act, and they aren't necessarily the same. They aren't necessarily they have different legal duties at different times. And so that doesn't help having the same term used in two places. We have different meanings for relevant buildings appearing in different regulations at different times, and so that's an interesting one. And the other one that I picked this one up and told a number of people about this before now. That our overarching construction regulator should be responsible for assessing the conformity of construction products, looking at legislation, looking at setting industry guidance, looking at setting industry standards, looking at testing and issuing product certificates. Now, we do know that there will be a number of us in manufacturing industry who've got experience of working with, there's a very similar setup to that in Germany. It's run through Deutsches Institut für Bautechnik, and they're a bit of a byword, because at the moment their waiting list is measurable in years for how long it takes to get a certificate out of them. So there is a concern that if we go that way, that it doesn't become we end up with an organisation that can't cope with the workload and ends up being too slow. From our point of view, I did put this slide together for council a few weeks ago, and basically, having seen what we've seen in the thing, we just continue. We think we stay on target. We continue to do what we've been doing over the last 6-7 years that I've been involved, and beyond. Before that other Niall and Wilf and Co were in, and David Sugden were involved. Let's continue to promote best practice. Let's continue to develop our competency pathways so that people can show that not just, and it's not just installers, but everyone involved in PFP can demonstrate that we know what competent looks like and that they are competent. We continue to expand our range of technical publications, training courses, and I will continue to work with government and other stakeholders to make sure that this kind of thing can't happen ever again. And while we're talking about that, I'll just do a quick canter through in terms of publication updates, and this really is hot off the press. Council passed our new yellow book for publication yesterday, and so for those of you who didn't know, the 6th edition of Yellow Book Volume 1, which is all the text for designers and designers, specifiers and installers, that will be published early in the new year, as we agreed at the last TG 1 and 2. So look forward to that coming out. That's got simplified and slightly reduced critical temperatures. So again, there's a significant change for that, and previously manufacturers have agreed that we're going to go over to the new temperatures early in the new year. I've got advanced drafts of the grey book ready to rock and roll. We just need to do a little bit more polishing on those, and then hopefully those will be out early in the new year. And beyond that, we're doing an awful lot of work on other market sectors. We've got the drafting group working on a revision of the purple book for fire resisting petitions. We've got a new volume 2 for the blue book, looking at all the other bits and pieces that sit around ductwork systems and some of the extended system calculations. And we've got 3 new colour books now, which we've started work on. A gold book looking at golden thread and that sort of information, a clear book looking at fire resistant glazing, and in the last few weeks we've started off TG10, the green book, producing a new guidance on fire resisting doors of any construction, wood, timber, whatever, looking at the fact that the operable element when it's closed in and its passive fire performance. And obviously one of the key things for that green book we'll be talking about is the fact that this is a market now that's moving, that for whom the change from 476 is going to be probably the biggest challenge. We've also got a number of advisory notes we're working on. We've got 2 that we've just published in the last which I'll talk a bit about more in a minute, but I'm working on 2 more, one on types of testing evidence, which is being tagged as advisory note 35, and advisory note 36 on the use of gypsum wall systems in smoke shafts. I'm awaiting some text from SIBSI, and if that doesn't get published, then that advisory note 36 goes out. And then we've just sort of started work through different little TGs on gateway 2 submissions. With our contractor TG is actually meeting, or is in the middle of a meeting at the moment, although they dialed out to join this. We'll be doing one for the golden thread TG9 about when is appropriate to make the choice of software for inspection and recording. And we've had some discussions within various people within TG6 and also with OPSS and other trade associations on a potential labelling scheme for dampers. So we stick a label on a damper that advises if this thing's going to have a breakaway joint, don't use tech screws in this damper. So there's lots of new stuff we can do to help try and improve, identify these, and as we continue to work, new advisories will come along as we become aware of issues that we can give advice on. Right. Hopefully you've all, this model isn't new to people, or if it is, this is because it's your first time. We came up a number of years ago with the concept of the areas that we as ASFP were seeking to work on. And in terms of passive fire protection, the 3 key ones we came up with were design of passive fire protection, the competence and the operating procedures of the installer, and the rigor of the product testing approval certification. And there was a meeting where Niall and I went to see government, and we said, right, this is our 3-circle model, we're doing the 3-circle. And government said, it's all very well and good, but actually your direction of travel needs to be the installation. You need to improve the installation, improve the installed product. So how are you considering the installed product beyond your 3 circles, which is when we put the the box around it and called installation. So we're looking at those three factors and how we can improve those to drive up the installation and what we can do to the installation itself. So let's consider the first of these three. And the first of these three is the vexed question of design. And of course, this is a problem because what we have is that design, it tends to happen at the moment or in the past, is that the principal contractor places the different, does it in silos. They let the project in silos, in packages. So you have a structural silo, a structural package, a dry lining package, a package for a contractor to come in and put the MEP in, and then a contract for somebody to come and put the PFP in. And with that in mind, what's the problem? Well, those silos move through the plan of works independently. So it can be quite often that structures already being manufactured, built, installed before we start to put the MEP in. And again, the MEP can be well into spatial coordination and technical design before we've even started to think about before we start to think about the fire protection. Okay, so what, Andrew? Well, let's consider this. I mean, this might be a REBA 1 decision here. Somebody's come along and they've decided that they're going to build a green building, and they've used a CLT floor slab on top of a structural steel frame. But here's the issue. There's no standard for fire resistance where measuring that steel frame in conjunction with the CLT floor slab. It sits outside the BS standards. It sits outside the BSEN 13381 part 4, part 8. So we've got some ad hoc guidance, we've got some ad hoc evidence of it, but that's all it is. And so there's bits and pieces we know about this, but the vast majority of that you will need it proving. And then once you've done that, if you want to pass any services through that building, again, there's no test standard. It's considered a non-standard floor construction, so there's none of the direct field of applications or extended field of applications for services passing through a floor or a wall would work, and therefore all your combinations need to be tested or assessed again on an ad hoc basis. And there's a number of projects I can think of when I say this next bit. When you look at what we have here, somebody put this model up and said this is what we should be doing is we should design the building, we should approve the design, we should build the building. And Niall and I sort of messed around with it and said, actually, quite often what happens is we build the building, and then having built something, we're trying to work out how to design it and approve it, and they overlap and they aren't even in the right order. So we're trying to get towards this, and this is where the Hackett's gateways and especially Gateway 2 will take us to this, because this is, you know, we're full plans, design the building. Gateway 2 is we approve that design, means we'll build it, and we'll build it accurately. Now, it's been really difficult, but we have just published a new advisory document. It's on the ASFP website, AN33. And it's guidance for those involved in designing passive fire protection. And it suggests ways to help mitigate this. And one of the problems with this has taken 12 months to get this document out. And it's taken 12 months to get this document out, not because the technical content in terms of what we wanted to put forward was disputed. The document advocates talk more, talk earlier. You get everyone round. Don't wait. Don't appoint your passive fire protection installer right at the very, very death and give them things that they can't work on, that sits outside. You know, consider passive fire as you do in your detailed designs of your services. Okay. And it promotes early discussions. And I think generally the concept of that was fine. Where I really struggled with it was the whole legal discussions about whose responsibility the design was. And so say the discussions, the document promotes to do it the right way, but where we fell over with it in trying to draft it was who designs rather than when it's designed, which is what the document is aimed at advocating. So I think we need something going forwards. We need a large procedural, we need a large sort of guide on that covers the who rather as well as the when, and we started to kind of work on that. We run our industry leaders day about twice a year, where we get people from test labs, from tier ones, and from specialist installers and product manufacturers round, and we've given them a number of topics to discuss, and they keep coming back and saying, Andrew, you need to write a big guide of how to do design and who does design. And that was the thing with from a number of groups that we've asked for. So we kind of started work on that, and I'm hoping that within the next 6 to 12 months, we've got some text that we can put out on this, and that should be an interesting thing as we work on it. But he says, so what does he says? One of the things with it is we need to understand how the whole contractual relationships work, which has been a new area of interest for me. And so as a result, I've been having some help, and there are those of you who will recognize the sorts of flow chart that you see here as we discuss how these contractual models work, because I've been getting some help with this from a guy called Paul McSoley. And we've been looking at the whole design process flow chart, and one I'll flick through this. I'll get to this one. So one of the things that we're looking to change is the relationship of these processes where we go forwards. The thing I'm highlighting here is within this model here, when we get to REBA 5, we've got these 3 boxes here, which is work, which is still in effectively design work that currently within our processes goes on within the manufacturing phase. And we want to advocate against that. Say, stop that, get the thing designed properly before you start to build it. And you will notice in this model down here, the same 3 boxes appear, but they're green. We'd like to move gateway 2 in effect to this point here. Make the gateway 2 process, make the design process longer, simplifies the construction, hopefully simplifies the construction process, and stops projects from being in a situation where they're having to do tests post to deliver that to post construction to justify what they've built. Right, that's our design bit. That's the design bit. Now we move on to construction products and construction product regulations and the like, and where we see going forwards with that. But before we do that, I have another significant one that's happened this year. I'm sure that all of you will be aware that late 22, early 23, government ran a consultation on removing BS 476 from ADB. And on the 2nd of September, a couple of days before the Grenfell report was published, government resolved that and announced that they would be removing BS 476 from ADB. And those revision texts are available. You can download them from the government website to see what those are going to look like. What's going to happen is that in terms of reaction to fire, 476 for reaction to fire is removed from ADB with effect from the 2nd of March next year. And that's a 6-month transition. And we got a 5-year transition for fire resistance, 2nd of September 2029. Now, obviously, this is removing 476 from ADB, and the key text at the little bottom of that little front page of ADB says for use in England. What about other devolved administrations? Well, Wales, we expect to follow suit on England, and there is actually a Welsh building safety bill promised to be before the Senate in summer 2025. So we see there'll be some movement on that in Wales at some point in the near future. Scotland have already removed reaction to fire, and the last time I spoke to them, they said they were considering the outcome of the English consultation before amending the technical handbook, and they tend to amend it every year. So I expect it to disappear on a similar spec, and then beyond that, Northern Ireland, God only knows when. Now that the Stormont's back up and running, they've got a big backlog of stuff to do. The interesting one actually was the Republic of Ireland, where they have recently, they've got their technical guidance document B has two sides to it, a residential and a non-residential volume, and they've recently republished the non-residential volume, and the non-residential volume has removed BS 476 for new build non-residential buildings, although it is still in there if you need it in support of a historic building where BS 476 was allowed in the first place. They haven't reviewed the residential volume as yet, and the residential volume still contains both 476 and EN 13501. And that works for both reaction to fire in the Republic and fire resistance. And one other point on the removal of BS 476, and don't know how many of you have seen this, but the government produced an impact assessment report on the on that removal of 476, and in there I've put clause 18 on the screen for you all to have a read of, which basically says that in order to mitigate against the testing requirement, we are going to get a new national standard for technical assessments to help maintain some of the flexibility that the BS system has above the rigidity of the EN. Now, we know about that work. That's a piece of work which ASFP has been working with BSI on a formal version of what's called the PFPF guide to conducting tests of fire resistance assessments based on fire resistance testing. So that exists and is out there. The PFPF guide exists and it's out there, and we're now working on producing a BS version of that. There will be a workshop with government at some point early in the new year where we're going to try and work out precisely what the text in there means, and how we might deliver that and what we need to happen to do that. In terms of the project on the BSI, with BSI on the assessment method, that business case has gone through BSI, and we're now waiting for BSI to appoint us a program editor to help us with that work. And we every time I see BSI, where's my program editor is the question that I'm asking. Okay, so that's the situation with 476, and what we're trying to do is work out how we can maintain some of the existing assessment flexibility that we have. We'll see where that goes. Beyond that, of course, Secretary Construction Products Regulations. Well, there's an ongoing long-running review of construction products regulations, which we're still waiting for to come forward. So I've already said that's the one last piece of secondary legislation that's missing from Building Safety Act. Building Safety Act gave provision for a safety critical product list to bring lots of products under the scope of a compulsory product regulation scheme. Obviously, from an ASFP standpoint, we've lobbied long and hard that we think that when this, if and when this happens, pacifier should be in there. So, that's what we would suggest. It's just waiting for this to happen and to see what this looks like. Now, when we were likely to see something? Well, one of the key things that we had a ticking time bomb, which was going to explode on us at the end of June next year, was the expiration of the acceptance of European CPR and European CE marking, which the Conservative government, the previous Conservative government had announced was a policy, although it was never underpinned at any stage by secondary legislation, and that was the deadline that they were working to. We know that there's a full UK CPR review underway under Morell and Day. Well, on the 2nd of September, again, statement in the House of Commons said that the end of construction products regulation and European construction product regulation and European and CE marking of construction products was postponed indefinitely. Now, what it should say is postponed indefinitely is an interesting turn of phrase. What it means is that government are saying that basically they will undertake to complete the Morell and Day response. They will complete the work, and once they've done that, they will give us 2 years to respond and 2 years to implement, minimum of 2 years to implement whatever changes they seek to make. So we now know that we're back into a holding pattern, waiting for construction product regulation changes. Certainly, from one standpoint, we were expecting to see something sooner than that, but and that the when we met government 12 months ago, the civil service was saying that they didn't think that a change of government would have an implication on how this unfolded, but actually it kind of doesn't feel like that anymore. It kind of feels like the change of government is going to have a difference in where that goes, and that's one of the reasons is because of the questions about how the new government seeks to position itself with regards to the European stuff. And it's worth mentioning while we're doing that the European CPR is changing. So if you work for a manufacturer and you sell stuff into Europe, one of the key things you need to be aware of is new EU CPR is coming out. Much of what was in the old CPR remains, although there are some subtle changes. And we're expecting imminent publication in the official journal of the EU and citation any day. I reckon it'll probably be about January. It'll be next January before it comes into force. And so it'll come into force for transition 12 months after it's cited. So if it gets cited, hopefully sometimes around about January, it shall come into force January 2026. And to be honest, 2 key differences that we need to be aware of. One is that it will bring about the need for a digital product passport. It's going to be a lot more product information having to go online in a set format. And there's workshops still trying to do that now as we do. And then the other is that all new, and bearing in mind, we're still in the situation where vast majority of fire protection is in a voluntary side. It's on the EOTA side. It's covered by European assessment documents. But all new harmonized ENs and all European assessment documents will need revising to bring into the scope of the new CPR, and they're going to be covering an increasing number of environmental sustainability indicators. And there is a time frame for this. And the time frame for this is this. So let's, if we have an EAD, a European assessment document, which is a product standard for a vast majority of our product families in and around Europe, as of 1st of January, it says 1st of November, but roll that back a couple of months because it's a little bit delayed on this time frame. So if the new CPR comes into force on the 1st of January 2025 and its date of application, it therefore is 12 months later, 1st of January 2026, during the period up to the 1st of January 26, we can use the current EAD to get a new ETA. After the 1st of January 2026, that EAD remains okay for a maximum of 5 years. For a maximum of 5 years, we can use the current EAD to produce ETAs. If we want to change that EAD at any point, we have to make all the relevant environmental changes as well as whatever change we want to make to it. So the maximum time period that we can get to is for that EAD. If we don't change it, we eventually will get to the 1st of January 2031. And at that point, that EAD ceases to be valid. No more ETAs under that EAD. If we change and at some point we'll have to change the EAD and bring it in line and adopt all these new environmental measures. And there is a bit of a challenge in there in that a lot of these new environmental measures don't have test methods and they don't have classification standards determined. So there's a massive body of work to be done on that as well. But let's say if and when we change it, be that before the 1st of January 2031 or on the 1st of January 2031, as the new EAD is published, all the existing ETAs all of a sudden have a 5-year shelf life from that point. So if we publish a new one on the 1st of January 2029, all the existing ETAs have a maximum 5-year lifetime, 1st of January 2034. So previously, there's been a situation where an ETA was for life, and once you got an ETA, it would exist forever, and it was down to the project team to decide whether that ETA was valid. Well, now there is going to be a finite life on our ETAs, 5 years. One of the challenges for us in the UK, therefore, is what are we going to do? Because government has been saying that they want to sort of a reset with our relationship of EU, and yet EU regulations remain at the moment are what we use, although it's written across into our own regulation. It's the EU cut and pasted into our own regulation at this stage. EU is moving in one particular direction. It's moving towards sustainability and environmental protection, not necessarily towards safety. Whereas the UK government seeking to reset the relationship. So what does that look like? Now, if we don't change our regulations, we diverge from the Europe because Europe are changing. And if we do change our regulations, if we go and adopt the safety critical stuff, that's divergence from Europe as well. So this is really quite a difficult thing for government to have to resolve, and I don't think they've necessarily got the head around it. The sarcastic picture at the bottom is post Brexit, and when a lot of this discussion started, and it sort of caught me a bit by surprise because I wasn't expecting to have conversations with people about alignment and returning to European standards, etc., etc. I googled BRE entry, and I got a picture of the entrance to BRE. So hence why there's a picture of the entrance to BRE for those of you that recognize it down at the bottom of this slide. Right. I have mentioned to you, to some of you about this. One of the earliest signs and tells of where the government is going. There's this thing, the UK Product Regulation and Metrology Bill, which is currently in its fairly early stages of its parliamentary journey, going through the House of Lords. And where you can read the blue block of text. Now, having read the stuff on this that says that gives the Secretary of State's powers to write similar provisions into our regulations to mirror European environmental impact stuff. There was an unclarity as to whether this is relevant to construction products. And the answer is it could do, but it probably doesn't. However, actually the point's moot, because the Secretary of State already has powers to make and write and edit construction products based on the stuff that's published in Building Safety Act. So Building Safety Act gives Secretary of State to the relevant Secretary of State powers to do this anyway. And we could do this, and this could be the sort of thing that goes through our government, and our government writes it and just copies, pastes, and produces a thing. And it doesn't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily need to go through parliamentary scrutiny. So, and the fact that that's there, I think it's fair to say it's more likely to be considered than not. And then the last one on construction products, and I'm just, crikey, is that the time? I've got some go, better get a wiggle on. CCPI, CPIL, one recommendation from a Hackett report is CCPI. We've been pushing it a lot. CCPI have now come up with a demand side supporters pledge. So we've got about 14 ASFP members passed and approved on CCPI who are manufacturers. Well done, everybody. Rest of you carry on. And we've got another 28, and we've got 28, I think, total. So there's not much gone through, but there's quite a nice proportion of ASFP members. There is now the first dozen demand side signing up for the demand side supporters pledge, which means that these are building contractors and tier ones who are supposed to, will be at some point in the future, will be specifying CCPI approved manufacturers. And that takes me to poll question 2, and I didn't realize quite how late it was. Crikey, I'll get a wiggle on. Right, there's an awful lot of answers on this one, and I apologize. Can you let me know if you're a manufacturer? Can you sign up and tell me what you're doing in the top half of that? And if you're a non-manufacturer, can you sign up and let me know what you're going to do about the supporter charter in the bottom half of it? Thank you. Okay, can we? So 10% of the manufacturers, most of you you're either in or considered applying, and of the non-manufacturers, you've got the vast majority are non-manufacturers, and it's the first you've heard of the supporter charter. Well, go and have a look at CCP Organize website, and let's okay, and have a look at that. Right, I'll just do a quick trundle through this, because I'm conscious of the fact that I've only got about 5 minutes and I've still got about 10 slides on this to go, so we'll have to be quick. Installers, in case this is a key one, in case you were unaware, competence and the law, Building Safety Act modified the building regulations to say that, in effect, any person carrying out building work or design work must have the competence to do that. So it's a legal requirement for us all involved in the construction process and giving advice and design, etc., to be competent in what we say. The key question is how you define competence and what we and how you measure it. And just for you, a bit of history. when we started off post Grenfell, there was a thing called the Competency Steering Group set up by Build UK, Construction Products Association, Construction Industry Council. That set up 12 different working groups looking at the competence of different roles. Working group 2 was installers. Working group 12 was those that handle construction products information, and those are the two that spring to mind because those are the two that ASFP was most involved in. HSE has since been set up as our new building safety regulator. They've set up a statutory committee that government told them to do called the Industry Competence Committee. And the Build UK stuff, the voluntary CSG, became the Industry Competence Steering Group, and it now reports into Industry Competence Committee. And those 12 working groups have morphed into a thing called in the Industry Competence Steering Group's sector-led groups. And you may well have heard of, we've been given, as ASFP, we've been given chair of a new thing, sector-led group 12, which is a group bringing together all the areas of passive fire, designers, installers of all the different passive fire families. That's going to be, and there's a meeting going to be set up in the new year to bring a lot of trade association people who are working on these competency frameworks together. And what we're doing is we're delivering the competency frameworks in terms of which is the identifying of what competency looks like in terms of skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviour, and feeding it back to HSE to give it back to HSE. I'm not going to, bearing in mind time, I'm not going to spend a lot of this. Basically, what we are doing is we are doing work at the moment in identifying what these competency frameworks look like. And then once we've done that, we'll give that to the installers. We'll map training against it. We'll create a register so that individuals can record their competence evidence. And competence evidence is more than just training per se. And then the employers will be responsible for doing that. And that will be hopefully part of the third-party certification schemes going forwards. And I've covered that slide so many times. I thought what I'd do is, in terms of one of the things I would say here today is we've produced a competency framework which we've given to HSE and is accepted as the industry standard for this. And if you look on our website, you can find it. It's there. It's free to use, open access. Please do. And if you pick one of the topics on here, you will find in there, and this is the one I've pulled up. This is in for a person who is an activity related information for somebody who is installing an ablative coated mastic, and it will give you certain statements in terms of their culture and behavior, their currency of competence and their experience, their core abilities and various specific abilities. And if you tap into one of these boxes, it expands and it's still virtually bloody unreadable. So I've pulled that information out. That explains to you what you should be able to demonstrate that you can do by way of evidencing your competence. We've got it on there on competence statements on the website for installers of fire stopping, for designers, for sales and distribution, and for and some of the stuff for designers. We are doing some more work on design, and we're nearly there with install of duct and damper, and before the end of the year we will kick off install of structural fire protection and install of fire resistant glazing. So that's all trucking along. And that takes me to, crikey, I'm going a bit of speed. Right, we've about 5 left to go. And that takes us to installation certification. So MHCLG has said the direction of travel that we should work on is to improve the installation. Okay, is that so? Is what we've talked about already enough or not? And we're working with the certification bodies to set limits and requirements in terms of inspection, etc., etc. Now, last time when we ran this webinar, I asked a couple of questions. And one of my questions was, do people agree that 100% with that 100% installer operative recording was true? And we got about 2/3 of you said yes. Well, we are going for it. We're going for 100%. But we also asked the question, should there be some form of client inspection? And which we've put down here as the Z at the number at the bottom. And the answer was 85% said yes, there should be some form of, the client should have somebody to inspect it as well. So I'd like to ask you a quick question now, which is, what level of inspection should I put on the installer's quality, and what level of inspection should be done by the client's inspector? And it's single choice for both of those bits. And George, have we got a couple of numbers to base that on? So 100%, a manufacturing quality should quality check 60% if you think 100%, and 65% if you think that the client appointed inspector should record and check 100%. I'll be honest, I didn't think it was going to be that high, but thank you very much for that. I think that might be I think both of those at 100% might be overkill, but we'll look at that as we go forwards. But it's really good. If not, so one of the things we're going to do is we need to put within our cert TG and installer TG, we need to put this sort of flow chart together that says what percentage of stuff gets inspected by whom, and we'll do that. And we're still waiting feedback on where construction products information goes, on whether government is going to mandate that we need to consider getting manufacturers more involved with reviewing the installation of their product. A topic that Niall and I touched on at the start of the year. So, final thoughts. We put this slide together ages ago, when not long after the review of Dame Judith published Building a Safer Future. And the stuff that's in the blue box is government stuff, and they're mostly doing what they said they were going to do. The one challenge is the construction product stuff, but the rest of what they said they were going to do, they've done faithfully. It's just the construction product stuff that's been mired with issues regarding Brexit and European standards moving as well. Beyond that, we can do the stuff on the bottom. We can increase the rigor of our third-party certification schemes. We can recommend better record keeping from our manufacturer members and our installer members. And we can recommend that it says increase competence, but it's also it's as much about demonstrating competence really as it is about increasing competence. Let's there's a lot of competent people out there. Let's help us evidence and demonstrate that going forwards. And that's all I'm going to do. So as a quick reminder, info@asfp.org.uk if you want your certificate. And I'm looking at the screen. I've got 4 questions. So it's two from an architect contact. Andy, I agree with the push for personal declarations of organisations performing PD. There remains a danger that individual designers and contractors behave passively. I would therefore like to see declarations from all parties working on HRBs at organisational levels. It's a fair point. Yeah, we can. Yes, I think that's not a bad point, and we can think about that and look about how we would achieve that. I like that. Stuart, great news on 33 and 34 being published. Will REBA and other architect groups be promoting these through their members? I hope so. we're reaching out through ATLG and other groups and that, and we're trying to increase our levels of engagement with architects. And it's worth mentioning that ASFP PFP courses are not just specific to installers and contractors, but extremely relevant to architects and designers. Thanks for that, Hassan. Well, that's a really good point. We'll follow that one up accordingly. And a link where the information on the website re-competency is. It's www.asfp.org.uk. Its competence framework is pretty much linked straight off the. If you scroll along the top bar, you will find the competency framework, and it's straight into it. But we will put a link on the, and I'll put a link in the chat as well before I've finished. Okay. Thanks very much for listening. Just before I disappear, again, info@asfp.org.uk if you want a CPD cert. We've got an academy session coming up on Tuesday, the 4th of February next year, looking at the role of digital product information and specification in fire safety. We've got a guy called Dr. Lee Jones coming in and running that. That's being run in in our academy. Okay, register for that. You find details of these on the website. We've got a Liverpool seminar on Tuesday, the 18th of March, 2025, navigating fire safety legislation and compliance for a safer future. By then, this is going to be a real pain in the neck for Niall and I, because not long before that, government will have had the opportunity to publish its response to Grenfell Phase 2 inquiry, and so we're going to have to be, those presentations are going to have to write themselves in the few days immediately before. That's in Liverpool. It's at the Titanic Hotel just across the road from the new Everton Stadium. And then lastly, we are merging the AGM and our London seminar into one event. Well, I don't think that, again, have a look at that. I don't think the date on that's right. I think that's meant to be, it's meant to be May. It's meant to be the 8th of May in that London, not the 8th of December. So have a look at that. It will in the morning we'll do the association updates, and in the afternoon we'll do the CPD presentations like we used to do at the old Aviva building. So come and get involved in all of those events if you want. And beyond that, thank you very much for listening. Thanks for attending. And he says, oh, there's a request there for the CPD. There you go. There's the CPD contact information on the screen in front of you. Okay. I hope you found that useful. And if I don't see any of you before, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you at one of these events in the near future. Thank you very much for attending.